بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله المبعوث رحمة للعالمين ونصلي ونسلم عليه على الدوام ونحن مأمورون على هذا أن نترك القرآن أما بعد. We wanted to return back to the life of Umar bin Khattab, and we wanted to take some lessons from the historian Dr. Hamdi Shaheen, historian in Islamic history. He's known in the Arab world to some extent. He's a professor, and he examines some narrations that were said to be, the historians, they differ, what was the first khutbah that Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu he gave when he became Khalifa. And in any event, the two khutbahs that are mentioned, regardless of the order of the khutbah, what came first, and it's not even a very long, it's not a khutbah like we understand it in the everyday Jum'ah sense, so to speak, but it's a short address to the people. Regardless of what Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu said first to the people when he became Khalifa, any one of the khutbahs that you choose, they summarize in a very brief way the understanding of Umar radiallahu anhu, and he's from al-Khulafa al-Rashideen. They summarize in this essence the sunnah of leadership, because we know that the sunnah of the Khulafa al-Rashideen is part of the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Before going into the issue of Umar's khutbahs, I wanted to remind us that we talked a little bit in brief about Hurub al-Ridda. This was one of the first challenges that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq faced with the transitioning of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Libyan Da'iyya, Dr. Ali Salabi, in his life on Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he pinpoints some of the causes that some of the scholars in general, they give to why it was that people deviated from Islam upon the transitioning of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of the things they said is that people had weak iman. Others is that they saw an opportunity to take advantage and to benefit their interests, and they saw the Muslims already starting to fight with each other, so to speak, and part of that was inspired by the munafiqeen, the people of nifaq or hypocrisy. So they were waiting to see who would be the one with the upper hand. So they retreated from Islam until they saw who had the power. And others were said to just have been straight from the munafiqeen. Those are some of the reasons why we began to see people that claim to be part of the Muslim Ummah, especially right after the transition of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, retreat from Islam. That's something that's very important. Why? Because Umar bin Khattab inherits an Ummah that went through those stages. You see what I'm saying? Umar bin Khattab is inheriting the leadership of the Ummah, and it went through that type of crisis during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's passing away under the leadership of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. So Umar was one of those people that when he came into Islam, he was seen to have brought some power to the Muslim community. There was that sense of weakness that the early Muslims had before Quraysh. Omar didn't fear Abu Jahl, and we know Abu Jahl was one of the main heads. He was the main head pretty much that was instigating Quraysh yarhamukallah, instigating Quraysh against the Muslims. When Umar takes Shahada, Umar is bringing with him his power, his sense of strength. You see what I'm saying? His standing in Quraysh. So that creates a line of defense for the Muslims, many of them who had that sense of weakness. That generation, and we talked about this in brief, they were called al-Ghuraba, or the strangers. One of the meanings that was given, and we pointed to this before, to the term Ghuraba, which is the plural of Gharib, or the strangers, is that they were a people, the early Muslims, that were plucked from their different tribes. And the tribal structure is what gave people support. It's what gave people protection. So if you had a weak tribe, that means that you didn't have as much support. So these people, because they became Muslim, they were plucked out. So there was that sense of, we have to hide our identity for our own well-being. And the da'wah wasn't at a point in the early stage for those Muslims to be able to openly oppose what the society, at that time the Quraysh, what they were believing and practicing. And we know the standard analysis on that. Quraysh, it was not only tradition, idol worship and the lifestyle that they had. It was not only something that was a tradition for them, and we know tradition is not easy to break, but they made money off of the fact that they had the custodialship or the authority over the Kaaba. They made money from that. You know what I'm saying? That gave them an overall advantage. So the Muslims were not in a position to really challenge that. Some say, this is the concept, the concept of taqiyya, where you don't really expose your identity 100%. Usually that's associated with the Shia. But in some situations, that becomes a reality. In order to manifest Islam, and Umar bin Khattab, he understood that really clearly. Umar understood that who he was opposing was not just Quraysh. He was opposing his own family. And Umar knew the reality of what that meant in that time period, which is a little different today, but in some cases not different. That meant that there was going to be some bloodshed, because Quraysh was not going to allow their economic standing to be undermined. Quraysh was not going to allow the generations that they had of idol worship, for that just to be transformed. It's like someone coming into your house and rearranging your whole life for you. We have to realize that's where the dawah was at. Umar was very clear at that point in time, that was very heated, that to be Muslim, there was a sacrifice that was needed. One of the things that we have to get out of our minds, sometimes we see from the vantage of generations of being Muslim. We see from the perspective of generations of being Muslim. Do you understand what I'm saying? We don't see the Sahaba as being those who, in today's time they converted to Islam. We think about them as, these Muslims that established the deen, but we don't think about them from the angle sometimes of, no, it didn't just work like that. When they converted to Islam, there was massive change and transformation that was taking place. Massive sacrifice on every level, even to the level of the loss of life. Not that the Muslims were provoking that, because the Muslims were not provoking that. Islam was not established by the sword, people. If you look, especially in the early history, Islam was not established by the sword. Quraysh, here, the non-Muslim opposition, is what forced the Muslims to defend themselves, even when the Muslims were being tortured and boycotted and exiled and humiliated and disgraced. Still, there was no call to defend the deen by the sword. And subhanAllah, from the hikmah of Allah Ta'ala, that shows the power of the deen. in today's time especially, because for a while, over the past maybe 200 years or so, with the rise of European powers, along with the rise of European powers was Christian missionary activity. And along with Christian missionary activity and the colonial powers, there came something that's called Orientalism. And Orientalism at that early stage was the study of Islam and the peoples that live in the Muslim world, with no exclusion of any language or any culture. So they studied Urdu, they studied Persian, they studied Turkish or Ottoman at that time. They studied the Druze, they studied the Shia, all the different groups of the Shia. They studied the Ahmadiyya movement. They studied, the followers of Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. They studied, the Al-Azhar al-Sharif and the Al-Qayrawan, the Deoband, whoever it was that lived in the Muslim world and that had some associate, they studied, they knew they were. Because they had a strategy. We need to know who these people are. We need to know their language, and we have a mission. So the missionaries, their activity was very strong. So they produced scholarship. And one of the things that they promoted as a concept is that Islam spread by the sword. That Islam spread by the sword, even though among them, there were people that wrote that that's not true. They have whole books on this issue. But that myth continued all the way to the time of today, in recent times, with Henry Kissinger. You know who Henry Kissinger is? Henry Kissinger is one of the foremost thinkers of, foreign policy and international strategy. You see what I'm saying? And he looked at the fact that the Muslims had a concept of jihad, and he labeled the Muslims as being people of the sword, which that was not the truth. There's no history to really prove. There's some periods of history, maybe going into Iraq and some places in Africa, where there was fighting and stuff like that took place, and it was a dominant thing. But when you look at history, the Muslims in a lot of those places, eventually they built their own civilizations. But majority of Islamic history, that's especially when you start going everything east of Iran, it didn't spread by the sword. So the Muslims earlier on, with the coming in of Umar, it gave them protection. They were in a position of weakness. So Umar developed what kind of reputation in light of what was said? What was the reputation that Umar had before that? Yes, he developed the reputation for being a person of power and strength. You know what I'm saying? They even used the words shadda wal batash, force, and imposing himself. So that sets the foundation. So when Umar takes the leadership, one of the first khutbahs, it may be one of the first, it may be the first, it may be, second or whatever, but the first khutbahs in general, he tells the people, he makes a dua. Allahumma inni shadid falayyinni wa inni da'ifun faqawwinni wa inni bakhilun fasakhinni. And this is Dr. Hamdi Shaheen, may Allah preserve him. He extracted from this something very interesting. Here is said to be, maybe it was one of the first khutbahs. Let's just say it's one of the earliest khutbahs. Umar bin Khattab is making a dua to Allah as a leader, right? And as one who's known to be strong and not fearful, one who defended the deen from the beginning, after being a what? An enemy to the Prophet Muhammad. He wanted to kill the Prophet. Umar wanted to kill the Prophet ﷺ, and ends up becoming a Muslim and one of the ones that defends the Prophet. So he asked Allah, oh Allah, I'm a person that's forceful, so make me easy. And indeed, I'm weak, so make me strong. And indeed, I'm stingy, so make me generous. So Dr. Hamdi, he says here, Umar gave us the example, one level of leadership, because the idea here of these khutab or these khutbas is to get the philosophy of organization and leadership from it. So here, Omar is being painted as if when all of us, even as regular Muslims, as special people like fathers or uncles or grandfathers, whatever it may be, whatever leadership position we may have, here is shown to ask Allah for those qualities to make you that person of leadership. See the difference between the Fortune 500 strategy of leadership, if you study those types of books, and the Islamic strategy. Here, Umar is asking Allah for the sifat, for those qualities which will make him a good leader that inshallah is pleasing to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Umar was known to be strong, but he humbled himself before Allah. Umar was known to be generous, but he humbled himself before Allah. And he's asking Allah for those qualities. So he's not drunk with himself. Because when we get into leadership and we get into position, we become drunk with ourselves, right? It becomes about the ego in us. So Omar at this point can't claim that he's strong. Why? Because he's looking at that as a problem between himself and Allah. So he's asking Allah to make him easy. To make him easy. He's recognizing. And then look, he's talking about the being forceful in his character. He's asking to be made easy. Then he's saying that I'm weak before Allah. Give me power. So what did he do? What did Umar do here? He created a balance, but what else did he do here? Look, how is he looking at power here? Yes. And that's going to come up in the other khutbah when he talks about the issue of power. But here, in the issue of akhlaq, this, Umar huwa fi ma'raka man nafs. He's in a battle with himself. He realizes he can be his own enemy. You see what I'm saying? This is very personal between him and Allah wa ta'ala. This is a different type of tazkiyat al-nafs. I'm not knocking the issue of making dhikr and I'm not saying it's bad and fasting and all that, but this is a different type of tasawwuf or tazkiyat al-nafs, if you want to use those types of terms. This is him as a man, as a human being, as an individual. He has to be there looking at himself. ويحدد يعني عيوبه. He's identifying what are his defects. It's a beautiful thing because he's teaching us even the leader should be like that. The leader should be conscious. And the leader should be aware of the fact that he has to surrender to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. That's the problem that we have in politics. If we ever talk about the return of some Muslim political system and all of that, you see what I'm saying? The leader we have to change the reality of how the leader operates. And that begins with each individual correcting himself. And then the issue of, even though Umar was known to be generous, he's asking Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to make him generous. So all of those, the issue of having a good character, easy character, to be compassionate or merciful to the people, so to speak, the issue of being strong, the issue of being generous, he's saying indirectly, this comes from Allah, it doesn't come from Umar. So that's one of the first things that we learned in the methodology of leadership from Umar, is the qualities that we have to make sure that we don't attribute them to ourselves. We attribute them to Allah Ta'ala. We surrender even in our talents, even in our strengths, even in our good qualities. We surrender it back to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. The second khutbah, it comes back to the point that you mentioned. He says, "Inna Allah ibtala'akum bi, wa ibtala'ani bikum." That Allah Ta'ala, He's telling the people now. Umar is not making, this is a different type of khutbah. Umar is telling the people that you're being put to the test. We're going to discover who you are. And I'm going to discover who I am, in this position of leadership. He recognizes that leadership, especially at this level, is an amana. It's a trust. And it's serious. It's not something that can be taken lightly. And then he mentions, that even at this time, in this phase in Islamic history, the Muslims grew. They went into other geographical regions. So he recognizes that there's people under his leadership that he can't see, or they can't see him. So he makes a commitment to the people that he would put people that are qualified and trustworthy to be in the position of leadership to what? To make sure that their rights are maintained. And then the famous saying, the saying that لا معصية الله في طاعة مخلوق, right? That there's no sinning against Allah or going against Allah while being obedient to a human being because of that. Umar is the one that introduces this concept and makes it very public. Although we find this in the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but by this stage it's very clear. And so Umar is making it clear that even though he's in a position of leadership, don't disobey Allah wa ta'ala if I do something wrong to obey me and what I'm doing wrong because I'm the leader. And isn't this point, people, where this is a big challenge of the age? But this is the whole concept of qanun, right? This is the concept of a legal system that the legal system, the individual is not above the legal system. The individual is not above the legal system. And in this case, with the concept of right or wrong. And that brings another reality, and that's the reality of enjoying the good and forbidding the evil. So the four, that the community, that the society has to have that. Well, I mean, we've been in this country right now, we just went through a whole phase with that. We have a political leader that's going in that was accused of going against, trying to do a coup of the government. But the claim is that what? He went to court and was found innocent. The struggle in that case between what's right and wrong would always maintain itself. When the legal system breaks down more and more, then we're in trouble more. Because that's, even though you can never have a system anywhere, even among the Muslims, which will be removed completely of corruption and all that. It's the issue of containing the corruption. It's the issue of making sure that the people of justice are more numerous, right? And that's why education and tarbiyah and all that is very important. It's the key. And the Prophet ﷺ began with that. The Prophet ﷺ didn't begin with changing Mecca through, politicking with the Quraysh here and there, or with this group and that. He began with the people and doing tarbiyah, and the people believed in Allah and they believed in other words, he began with transforming the hearts. That doesn't mean that we stay 20 years, 100 years, and we're just focusing on what? Let's get the nafs without engaging the society. That's not how this works. That's unfortunately what has happened when the Muslims are weak, the du'at, the imams, the mashayikh, because of the difficulty of confronting the problems in the society, we end up calling the people retreat, leave that. And so when you have that type of approach towards the deen, which is only focused solely on the spiritual life, and you leave out the material life, you leave the door open for the people of what? Of corruption and injustice to take over. No, there has to be a balance. There has to be a balance. That's why a principle that's important for us is, as human beings we sin. But what's the limit in sinning? What's an important limit in sinning? It's related to enjoying the good, forbidding the evil. Anybody? I ask these type of questions to get you to think. That's why I'm not always 100% clear in what I'm saying.
Don't harm another person.
Yes, don't bring it into the public. Right? If you're going to sin, contain it within yourself and limit the harm. But when you bring the sin, when we allow the corruption and the injustice to come out into the open, and it becomes the norm, it becomes the rule, it becomes what governs, we can never easily take control over that. But if we can contain the sin to ourselves, that doesn't mean that that's going to be any better. Right? Sin is damaging to us. We have to be very clear to that. You see what I'm saying? But it's better to struggle with ourselves than to make that in the public. What is, when it comes to sin, what's one of the clear pathways to kufr? Aside from shirk. If we do what with sin? If we believe what? If we say what with regard to sin? Something that's haram? Yes. When we do that, it's different than we fall into the haram and we what? We know it's haram. We're not justifying it. I'm struggling. But when we change the haram into the halal, right? That's now where we're opening the door to the kufr. When we're doing that intentionally and we're doing that, knowingly, not ignorantly. Umar bin Khattab, one of the things that he did, and this is why the madhab of Imam Malik, Medina itself, was, it was very much, aside from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, it was very influenced by Umar. And the Maliki madhab was very influenced by Umar. And Umar always had the idea of what's in the interest of the people. What's in the interest of the people. One of the things that he said in one of his khutbahs, and he made sure the people knew, and this is an important point. He said, فَعَلَمُوا أَنَّ تِلْكَ الشَّدَّةَ قَدْ أُضِعْفَتْ. The strength that you see in me as a strong person, he's telling the people, know that it has increased. Right. So the people are, because they already know that Umar is strong. And he's letting them know, I'm not weakening up on my strength. But it's not like we think like Umar is taking his strength and throwing it on the people, making him fearful. He's saying that my forcefulness, my power is for the people of dhulm and for those that go against the boundaries that are set by the deen, those that are unjust. He's making a call. He's calling out the oppressors, the people that go against the rights of others. He's not terrorizing the society. He's not making the people fearful of him in general. He's setting the standard of justice. But the people that are oppressors, the people that violate the rights of others, he's making sure they have a clear understanding. We're coming for you. You know what I'm saying? We're coming for you. We're not going to let you slide on that. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was faced with that reality. The people tried him. You see what I'm saying? Those who had other things going on in their hearts that were part of the Ridda wars, Hurub al-Ridda, and leaving the deen, they tested Abu Bakr's leadership. And they almost completely destabilized the da'wah. Because when you go into the history books, and we pointed this to before, it was a lot of people. It was not a little bit of people. Thousands. And that could have transformed the nature of the da'wah overall. And you find that the people of the Sunnah, all the way from the time of that period up to now, they still struggle to try to maintain, because it's a work in progress. Umar had to make sure that they were clear. That type of, those people still existed, even with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, fighting them and controlling them so they don't destabilize the society. Umar, they still exist in the time of Umar bin Khattab. And Umar, one of the statements that's attributed to Umar, he was happy that he didn't die at the hand of a Muslim. For him, that was like a big accomplishment. The reality of maintaining that society, that community of Iman, it was not easy, people. And this is what we have to realize. Like, keeping community, building society, building a nation, having power, all of that is not easy. It can be easily corrupted if people come to take it. This is, as men, we have to teach our children that reality. Right now with the fires in LA, what are they saying about the fires in LA? You have it.
They're being burned down.
Aside from the being burned down stuff. They're saying the real estate agents are there trying to buy up the houses while the people... See what I'm saying? You have somebody, you're in your crisis moment. And what's happening? Somebody else sees opportunity, is trying to what? Take advantage. As an ummah, this is what we said, people study us. And they look, how can they take advantage? And as an ummah, we have to be awake to that reality. Ummah teaches us power is important, but not power in itself. Using power to benefit us as a community and what's right and what's good and what's pleasing to Allah. Not just power for power's sake. That's where sometimes the Islamic movements, some of the people that don't have enough tarbiyah, they make mistakes in that regard. Because they start thinking, if we get power, then everything will be... No, it doesn't work like this. It's not just power. It requires a shaping in the development of the people, right? And I want to close with this. When we talk about understanding the deen,